Where did he go?
Oh, he's downstairs. Let's come.
طيب. طيب بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وبعد. If you remember when we started the types of sunnah, we broke the sunnah into 8 different categories. And we said with respect to the first category, inshallah we'll discuss it when we discuss the Qur'an sunnah. The Qur'an, yani the same principles apply to the statements of the sunnah as apply to the statements of the Qur'an. So then we did explicit actions, and we broke explicit actions into 10 different categories. And we discussed them in some detail. Well, that's all I'm going to talk about with respect to the explicit actions of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So if you have any questions regarding the last 4 or 5 lectures, how many were there? 4 lectures, I guess. This is your chance to ask them. Otherwise, we'll move on. And last time, at the end of the last session, first of all, I was a little bit tired, so that's why I didn't control the class as well as I should have. And I let some people talk more than they should have. At the end of class, some people did not appreciate what I was trying to do by that handout. That you can take any action of the Prophet ﷺ and analyze it by that handout, by the 7 steps that we discussed last time. And I think all of you were here last time. You weren't here last time? It's the first time you weren't here, so I expect you to be here. Did they have 2 or 1 handout last time? Just 1? So you can use these 7 steps to analyze any action of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So now we're going to move on from there. And we're not going to discuss all of these other 3 through 7. We'll discuss what we can today, and then we'll leave this topic to move on to another topic. So inshallah we'll begin by discussing tacit approval or iqrar, and then if we have time we'll discuss number 7, because number 4, 5 and 6 are rather 4 and 5 are rather clear. Number 6 needs some discussion, but we may not have time for it. So let's move on now to number 3, iqrar, or tacit approval. Okay, what's the definition of it? Remember, any definition has to include everything that should be included and exclude everything that doesn't belong. And I know all of you have an idea what's the meaning of it, so just say what you think.
Whatever deed or say that was performed in front of Rasulullah, and Rasulullah just did not say anything about it.
Okay. So it's Naam? What? Or approved it? Proved it in what way? Okay. Any deed or action. What did you say?
He said
No, just any deed or action. After that, what?
that was performed in front. Not necessarily. Not necessarily because that Rasulullah had a knowledge about it.
Okay. Knew about and
By not saying
and approved by not saying anything. What?
You might say a good deed. Sometimes I think
Okay. And let's put it this way. He did not refute or reject it. Is that okay? Okay, now our goal, is this definition clear to everyone? what we mean by iqrar? Naam? What? Refute? Refute or reject it. Yani refute is similar to reject. Now, what we're trying to get here, when going through the sunnah and these different types of sunnah, what we're trying to distinguish between what we'll call legal sunnah from non-legal sunnah. Okay. That's one of our goals here. And our goals are actually twofold. Number one, distinguishing legal sunnah from non-legal sunnah, and then trying to figure out what should we do with the legal sunnah. Okay. So the obvious question that applies here, what we mean by legal sunnah is those sunnah that are hujjah or authority in Islamic law. Okay, form a basis for the sharia. That's what we mean by legal sunnah. All of these things are sunnah according to the scholars of hadith, but from usul al-fiqh point of view, we do not consider them all sunnah. So the next question is, this is the type of sunnah. The next question is it a hujjah? Is it an authority? I'm sorry? And he did, oof. That's a big, hey, barakallahu feek. I hope you all should have cut that. If you understood the definition, you all should have been able to catch that I missed that. Thank you for pointing that out. If it was without it, the next question would be easy to answer. The question is this hujjah in Islamic law? Is it a source of Islamic law? If the Prophet ﷺ approved something, does that mean that action now is considered approved by the Sharia?
When you say approved, you mean there will be hukum practice from that?
The hukum or the ruling could be either permissibility or...
Sure.
Remember, permissibility is the hukum or ruling of Islamic law. Okay. In order for something to be permissible, according to most of the ulama, some of the Mu'tazila of course disagree with that, but for anything to be permissible, there has to be some evidence for it to be permissible. So the question is this hujjah?
Yes.
If it is hujjah, what's the proof that it's a hujjah?
Well, it's not a hujjah. Rasulullah was not allowed because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us
okay. Now you're talking about a specific act. First of all, Ibn Hajar in Fath al-Bari, he said there's ijma' that there's hujjah, but that is not correct. There are some people who say it is not hujjah. So let's first discuss what are the arguments that it is hujjah. Ahmed, what were you saying? Sorry to interrupt you.
In the Qur'an, I don't remember the verse, but it says that all the knowledge of whatever knowledge that was needed to the Muslim was given by Rasulullah. So that action or that deed was not considered a hujjah and it was against the Sharia, Rasulullah would refuse.
Okay. Let me rephrase. I'm assuming this is what you mean from the Usuliyan's point of view. Okay. I'm going to rephrase what you said. According to all of the scholars, and they have, of course, evidence for this, a delay a delay in explaining something or making something clear is not permissible. If for example the Prophet ﷺ knows that an action is haram, then it's not permissible for him to keep that to himself until 2 or 3 months later, and then say that it is haram. Okay, so I think that's the point that you're trying to say. Therefore, if an action is done in front of the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet knows that it is haram, then it is his duty to say it is haram. Okay. So if he doesn't say anything, then this is a type of bayan or type of explanation that the deed in fact is not haram. Okay, what else? Pardon?
Specific action.
What do you mean?
Specific one example, I don't know, I'm gonna just state it and you see if it's right or wrong. In Badr war, that when they tried to the ghanaim of the war.
Okay. The booty from the war.
The Umar Khattab said like his opinion, or stated his opinion.
Oh, okay. You're talking now about the prisoners of war in particular.
Prisoners of war.
Uh-huh.
And the Quran, Muhammad sallallahu approved Abu Bakr, and then the Quran came to support Umar Khattab.
Okay, in that case, it was more his accepting the opinion of Abu Bakr, and he is implementing the opinion of Abu Bakr also with his own statements. And he could not make the argument for Iqrar in that case because you have both Abu Bakr's opinion and Umar's opinion, and he did not just leave them both, but by his statements he acted upon one of them. And we're looking for something more general here. We're looking for the proofs that if the Prophet ﷺ did not say anything, then that means that that action is approved. Is this the only proof that we have?
About the understanding of Sahaba.
Okay. What do you mean by that?
I mean, they say we were doing this.
Okay. There is ijma' or consensus of the Sahaba that if the Prophet ﷺ did not object to anything, then that means it must be acceptable. Okay. So we have ijma' of the Sahaba. Anything else? Okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Qur'an describes the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as, and in the verse talking about the people who believe in the unlettered prophet or ummi, and he describes him as ordering the good and eradicating evil. And the Prophet ﷺ himself orders good and eradicates evil. So if the Prophet ﷺ is seeing evil in front of him and he's not eradicating it, then in fact he's not fulfilling that verse, or that description of him is not correct. So Allah describes him since Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the Prophet ﷺ as eradicating evil, what that means is that it must be the case that if he sees evil, then he has to eradicate it. Not quite. The first, there's a difference between bayan and eradicating evil. Bayan is explanation. Okay? An explanation that this deed is haram. But in the third one, he'll take steps to remove that evil. And the fourth evidence that they give as the proof of the hujjat of what are we discussing here? Al-Iqrar. Is that in general, Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy anil Munkar is wajib, or ordering good and eradicating evil, is obligatory upon the general believers, especially the ulama So therefore it must be even more so obligatory upon the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it is a little bit related to this, that in general, ordering good and eradicating evil is an obligation upon everyone, and including the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So therefore, when he sees evil, and he must have eradicated it. Yes, and if it is obligation, if we expect the believers to do it, then it's obviously the case that the Prophet will do it. Okay, those are basically the four proofs for the hujjiyat of the Iqrar. Now, I didn't try it. Ordering good and eradicating evil obligatory, in general, and therefore even more so for the Prophet Muhammad. Okay. What are the proofs? As I said, there's not ijma' on this point, even though Ibn Hajar said so in Fath al-Bari. What are the proofs that Iqrar is not hujjah? Can anybody think of any? No, general, like those.
Maybe they're, I'm just guessing what they think.
Sure, go ahead.
Maybe they say because it's not explicit action or statement, so we cannot really defend.
Okay, that's part of it. It is not explicit. And the rest of that is that, for example, the Prophet ﷺ could have seen someone doing something, and he is, and the Prophet ﷺ knows that person doesn't know the law, and he is jahl. So therefore, the Prophet ﷺ, doesn't refute him because he knows that the person is not doing it, out of a bad intention, but just because he is ignorant. Okay. What's the answer to that? Well,
if it's known for the companions, and that's the only one who doesn't know, that doesn't mean not explicit.
Well, I think the answer to that is in number one over here. Just because the Prophet ﷺ knew that someone is ignorant doesn't mean that he will allow him to do the act. Somewhat?
Some discussion. They don't take it.
The delay in bayan is not permissible? Yeah, this is the opinion this is the strongest opinion. This is the opinion of the Jamhur, or the majority of the scholars. This one. You're talking just about that point, right?
Yeah. The second point is against the first point.
The second point is that point isn't valid? It's permissible, okay. Okay. Okay, and what's the answer to that? It's not permissible. What's the proof that it's not permissible? If the Prophet ﷺ is not conveying the knowledge that he knows, he's not doing his duty of conveying this knowledge. So therefore this is not permissible, although... Yeah? I'm sorry?
Not a strong point.
Hey, now, this is some of the Mu'tazila, they say that. The special case is something, we'll talk about that when we talk about the shurut of Iqrar. But in general, it is not true. Now, the strongest argument is probably this is the last one that I'll mention, is that it may be the case that the Prophet knows that advising this person is not going to benefit him. Okay, the Prophet ﷺ sees someone doing something wrong, and he knows that if he tells him it's wrong, or if he disapproves of what he does, it's not going to benefit him. So therefore, he doesn't do anything. Okay? And there's some proof, and they use one verse in the Qur'an as support for their argument. Does everyone get that argument? I didn't write it down, right? And the Prophet ﷺ sees someone doing something wrong, but he believes that reminding him will not benefit him. The person will continue to do it wrong, to do the wrong thing, so therefore he doesn't mention it. Okay, and in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَذَكِّرْ إِن نَفَعَتِ ذِكْرَ. Well, some of the Mufassirin, they take in here meaning as if, remind them if there's any benefit to the reminder. Okay, that's another case. Okay, so they're using this verse in the Quran also to support this opinion, that if the dhikr or if reminding someone is not going to benefit the person, then it's not obligatory to remind them.
Okay, maybe this is in some cases.
If it's in some cases, it's sufficient to prove that iqra is not hujjah. Suppose it's in 50% of the cases, that's sufficient. Right? Because then how are you going to know which is which?
But this is against what Rasul did to Kuffar Makkah. He tried his best, although he didn't know this in a work all of it.
He tried his best
to zikr.
Aywa.
All the Kuffar, he distinguished a person from another person.
Okay, basically, there's some two things. There's some validity to this argument. Okay, we're going to answer this argument. Number one, the answer is going to be by the conditions that we're going to lay down for iqrar. In other words, we're not going to accept every type of iqrar. We're going to lay down conditions, and these conditions are going to respond to this charge. Secondly, and perhaps this is what Naif meant, is that this situation probably would be rare. Okay. Why do we say it would be rare? Anywho.
Because the general rule is...
No, I mean the fact that the Prophet says that there would be someone during the Prophet's time doing something wrong in front of him, and he knows that to tell him. What generation was the Prophet ﷺ dealing with? Okay, the Prophet ﷺ was dealing with the best generation raised for mankind. What we know about the Sahaba is it wasn't the case that they were doing something wrong and they would continue to do something wrong, whether the Prophet ﷺ told them not to do it or not.
Everything shouldn't be from the basics.
Shouldn't be what?
From the basics, from the fundamentals.
Okay, yeah. Okay, that will be also in the conditions. Okay. So given these are the arguments against it being hujjah, and these are the arguments that it is a hujjah, which should we conclude with? Okay, this is the opinion of the vast majority of the scholars. Such a majority, as I said, that Ibn Hajar even thought there's ijma'. Oh, you're okay.
You are saying that Ibn Hajar saying this is not. How is that not? But Mu'tazila will not be considered as people who are...
I didn't write down their names, but An-Nawawi in Majmu' Sharh al-Muhaddab, he mentioned some of the ulama who do not accept it as hujjah. They're not large in number. As I said, they are so small in number that someone like Ibn Hajar, who read a lot, he will come to the conclusion that there's ijma'.
But what the Imam Sahaba about? Was it about that they are okay or that they were
No.
doing something?
That the taqrir is hujjah. Yeah.
So how come anybody can let the Sahaba refuse it?
Oh, yani that's not unusual.
But it's not valid.
Yeah, it's not valid, but it's not unusual. For someone to come later, number one, he may not have known there was ijma' of the companions. Number two, he may not believe in ijma'. Number three, he may not believe in the narration that this is ijma'. So, yani, that's not unusual.
How much of this has been taken as law?
How much?
Are there many examples?
Oh, sure. Yeah, we'll get to some, inshallah. Okay. Now, before we get to the conditions of an acceptable iqrar, and we should realize that there's different levels or different strengths of iqrar. Okay. The first one is the iqrar is also supported by a statement. Okay. Now here you could argue that then it's no longer iqrar, but it becomes aqwal, and that's a good argument. But the usuliyin they include it here. An example of that is the Prophet ﷺ, and when he talked about the tribe of Al-Ash'ari, he said that when they're at war or when they have little food in the city, they gather together everything that they have and they distribute it equally among them. And so the Prophet ﷺ described what they did, and then he said that they are from me and I am from them. Okay, so he's describing their actions, and the way he said it shows that he is approving of their actions, but especially the last statement where he's saying that I am from them and they are from me, or actually the opposite, I guess. They are from me and I am from them. Okay. Also the famous hadith of Mu'adh that we discussed earlier, about when the Prophet ﷺ was sending Mu'adh to Yemen, and he asked Mu'adh, how will you judge? And then he said, by the book of Allah and then the Sunnah, and then he will use his Ra'i. What did the Prophet ﷺ say to him after that? Yeah, not exactly hada, but and it comes from the root rada. And so his statement at the end shows that he is approving of what the Sahabi said or did. Okay. The second type of iqrar, and this is probably more an iqrar in which the Prophet does something to support the act. Now, but the action himself, and he's not doing the action himself, but he is doing something to support the act. For example, in the day of Eid, when the Abyssinian warriors were doing the war dances in the mosque, Aisha, the Prophet's wife, wanted to watch them, so the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ used his arm to help her, to reach or to prop up, to see what they're doing. Okay, Prophet ﷺ didn't say anything. He's not actually doing anything, but by his actions, he is supporting the fact that Aisha can watch what they're doing, and also he is supporting what they're doing themselves. Abyssinian. Nowadays it's Ethiopia, but it used to be Abyssinia. Okay.
I thought she was pushing her head on his shoulder.
On his shoulder or his arm or something. Anyway, he helped her prop up somehow so she can see what's going on. So he didn't actually say anything, and the action that we're talking about is not his action, but what he did supports that act. this will be stronger than other types of iqrar. Okay.
What is the relation with fiqh?
Pardon me?
What is the relation of this example with fiqh?
Okay, this is an example in which Aisha is trying to do something and the Prophet ﷺ helps her do it. Okay? So, this shows that this act must be permissible. And this is strong evidence. This is stronger evidence than just the Prophet ﷺ standing there and watching her do it and not doing anything. And he's actually involving himself in the action, supporting the action. Is that clear?
Yeah, it is clear, but I don't see the relation with fiqh or usul fiqh or what can be learned from it or
and
an example of iqrar, but what is the idea we get from it or what is
what we're saying is that there's many types of iqrar and they have different levels of strength. Yeah, didn't they say that? Different. But I didn't write it as usual. Of the different types of iqrar. Okay. You can tell I have much more energy than last Thursday. Last Thursday I didn't even...
I know what is the type, but what does that example teach us or instill?
Oh, okay, that's a different question. We're not concerned about all of the fiqh points from that. What we're just trying to say is that there's different types of iqrar, some stronger than others. And this is an example of this type of iqrar. That's all we want to get from it for this class. Okay? The third type of iqrar is an iqrar in which the Prophet's acts or his statements show that the results of the deed and therefore the deed itself are permissible.
Very much
Technical?
because could be
this is a little bit different now. And here he's talking about the results. For example, some people they slaughtered a type of food, and some people were not sure whether this food was permissible or not. So the Prophet ﷺ said, distribute it and give me a share.
well, that is a part of what we might think.
Okay, and he's not talking about what they did, but the results of it, the meat.
That's what I'm saying. It doesn't matter.
Okay, had he said that the slaughtering itself was halal, then it would be up here. That would be much stronger than what he did. Someone could argue that he didn't know what's the source of that meat, as opposed to this case up here. If he were to say, it is halal. So it is, in order to answer that argument for someone to say that, he didn't know the source of that meat, we are saying that, since he's showing that the results of the deed are permissible, this is implying that he knew what the deed was and he is accepting it.
No, I'm not confused.
No, I think it's too detailed, too technical. We have an hour and a half to kill, so we need some... Okay, next there's actually why I'm going through this is the last category is what actually we really want to get to. The last category, in this row, in this topic, is something that Uthman and I, we had a disagreement about. He said there's such a thing as tacit disapproval. I said there's no such thing, but it seems he was correct. There is tacit disapproval. Okay. Now? He'll get the tape, I'm sure. Iqrar in which the Prophet ﷺ shows approval of the act. Simply shows approval. Okay, for example, someone does something in front of the Prophet ﷺ and the Prophet ﷺ just smiles at him. Okay. He smiles at the person. There's many hadith of that type. None of them come to my mind right now, but I can assure you there's many hadith of that type. Okay, this would be stronger than Iqrar, in which the Prophet shows no sign of content or displeasure. Okay, this kind here, in which the Prophet ﷺ shows no sign of content or displeasure, is it hujjah or not?
According to me.
According to this guy in his madhab, it is hujjah. Okay, obviously, this is the basic type that we're talking about here. Okay. So this is obviously hujjah, no question about it. The Prophet ﷺ didn't show any content or displeasure. It's hujjah. Now here's the one that I was trying to get to. An Iqrar in which the Prophet shows signs of displeasure. Okay? He doesn't say anything necessarily, but you see on his face that he is displeased with the act. How to deal with this one? Okay, why do you say it's not hujjah? Okay, and he is showing in fact that he doesn't like the deed. Like when Aisha had a curtain which had pictures on it, when the Prophet ﷺ came to the apartment and he refused to enter, and in his face there was signs of displeasure. So Aisha knew right away there's something in the house that doesn't belong there. Okay, so this is not the type of iqrar that we're talking about. Okay, Taqiyuddin al-Nabhani.
This is saying just the opposite.
لا إقرار يعني means you're approving of it. Okay, this is now, this is what Uthman would call tacit disapproval. My point is, this is not a proof that the action is acceptable. That's my point. Okay. Yeah, this is a proof that the action is not acceptable. So it differs from all the other types of iqrar.
But it is a hujjah.
It is a hujjah, as the action not being acceptable. Okay, yeah. Or from the way we're discussing it, it is not hujjah from the way we're discussing it. Huh? This is a kind of iqrar. But it is not what we're talking about. Unless you take it from Bassett's point of view that it is a type of tacit disapproval.
Because this happened so many times.
Yes. Now some modern writers, they try to use this type as a proof that something is halal. Okay. For example, Taqiyuddin al-Nabhani, he talks about a hadith. First of all, the hadith is weak, but anyway. He uses, there's a hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ was walking, I believe, with Ibn Umar, and they heard someone playing like a flute or some wind instrument that they had at that time. And the Prophet ﷺ put his fingers in his ears in order not to hear the instrument. Okay. First of all, the hadith isn't authentic, so right away you cannot base any argument on it. But the Nabhani, he uses this hadith as a proof that music is halal. Musical instruments is halal because he's saying this is the iqrar of the Prophet ﷺ. How? The Prophet ﷺ did not reject the deed. He did not say, that is haram, you have to stop. He did not, tell his Ibn Umar or whoever was with him that, you cannot listen to that. Okay, this is his argument. Okay. Yeah, I know, because this kind of iqrar is not acceptable. We already established that fact.
If you know the shepherds, their instruments goes very far. Probably he doesn't even see. He just heard the music. So he cannot eradicate the guy.
Okay, what about the people who are with him?
It's just fine. Because we know all of it.
Okay. Anyway, this kind of iqrar, regardless of how weak his argument, as I said, even the hadith is weak from the beginning. Okay, this kind of iqrar is not a proof that the action is acceptable, but in fact, it is the proof that the action is unacceptable. So we have to distinguish between the different types of iqrar, and if there's any conflict between them. Okay, this is the ranking that we would put the iqrar. This is the strength. If there's some conflict, ta'arud, between some different types of iqrar, this is the ranking that they take. And when we get to conflict of evidences, which of course we will not, this would play a role. Now,
sometimes the Prophet disapproved by a statement.
Hey, yeah, that's over here. He supported something by a statement.
So this is basically the same meaning of all of them, except that this is correct.
But there would be no need to go into such detail, right?
I know. What do the Ulama say about this?
About this last one? All of them agreed that this is not a sign of approval.
I know, but do they say it's hujjah or not?
Yeah, it is hujjah in the sense that you mentioned it, that it is a sign that the action is not acceptable. But my point is, some people are trying to use this as the general type of taqreer that it happened during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. He did not reject it explicitly, so therefore it must be acceptable.
Oh.
Yeah, as in the example I gave. From Taqiyuddin Nabhani, he's alive, I think, nowadays. Is he still alive? Okay, but he's a modern writer, in this century. Okay, any questions about the different levels of strength? Everyone clear about why we did that?
When you say the different level of strength, you're not saying that this is a stronger hujjah, or it is?
Yeah, it is a stronger proof in the sense that, and if you have something, if you have an action, okay, and there's some dispute whether this action is halal or haram, and there's some evidence, all of it is not explicit, and this is the only kind of iqrar you have for it, and that would not be as strong as having this type of iqrar. Any questions about that? Okay, now let's move on to conditions for the soundness of iqrar. Should I write that? What's the meaning of soundness in Arabic, for in case there's... Okay. It wasn't what I had in mind, but any validity. Okay. What are some of the conditions?
It has to be clear that the Prophet saw that.
Okay, the Prophet ﷺ knew about the act.
That's the definition of iqrar.
That's
the definition of iqrar.
No, there could be an act during the time of the Prophet ﷺ that the Prophet did not know anything about. So therefore he did not reject it. It's one of these. There's no sign of content or displeasure from the Prophet ﷺ. But if he didn't know about it, then obviously he's not going to have any sign of content or displeasure. Okay, Ibn Hajar says this is not one of the shurut or the conditions for iqrar. His evidence that it is not a condition is the statement of, I believe, Jabir, who was talking about, not the famous Jabir nowadays, the Sahabi Jabir, who was talking about the practice of azl, or in English, coitus interruptus. He said that they used to practice azl while the Qur'an was being revealed. Well, Ibn Hajar says if it was haram, then the Qur'an would have prohibited it. And Ibn Hajar is arguing that even if the Prophet ﷺ didn't know about it, if the action was being performed during the time of the Prophet ﷺ by the Sahaba and it was haram, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, either in the Quran or through revelation to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, would have informed him of it and would have prohibited it. True? No?
I missed these.
Okay.
Even if he didn't know.
Okay, there's an action that the Prophet says that the Sahaba are doing, and the Prophet ﷺ doesn't know anything about it. Like azl, for example, that the people do, the people do it in their houses, and the Prophet ﷺ isn't going to know about it unless someone explicitly asks him about it.
First of all, when we're talking about this specific case,
just
that a lot of people are doing it.
Now, that's just an example.
Yeah, but as somebody in the time of the Prophet, one guy who did something that is questionable, and only one person was taught, it doesn't have to be that revelation has to come to eradicate that, because this is not the norm of the people.
Yeah. Okay, most of the people do not accept Ibn Hajar's argument that the Prophet ﷺ didn't have to know about the act. They say that this is the proper condition, that the Prophet ﷺ had to know about the act. Okay. Now, with respect to this, as Ahmed pointed out, there's some actions that were well known. Okay, they're done in public. For example, the type of food that they used to give for Zakat al-Fitr. And it's something done in public, it's well known. And those actions that are well known, we assume, and the Prophet ﷺ must have known about them. So in other words, if he, if we have an example like this where the Sahaba said, we used to give such and such as Zakat al-Fitr, and since it's something done openly, we assume the Prophet ﷺ knew about it, and so therefore it will come under this type of iqrar, and it will be hujjah. In other words, that kind of food may be given as Zakat al-Fitr. If the action is something hidden, or something rare, hidden, what I mean by hidden is something done in private, then we cannot assume necessarily that the Prophet ﷺ knew about it. Yes. Ahmed considers it something well known that many people are doing, but I think many ulama, when they discuss it, they put it under this category. And because it's something between a man and his wife that's done privately, and there's no reason to assume that the Prophet ﷺ necessarily knew about it, unless you can show, which is I guess what Ahmed is assuming, that it was something well known at that time, for example, as a method of birth control. No. Oh no. And when it comes to birth control, human beings have been ingenious from a long time ago. Long before the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Is there a specific statement of the Prophet ﷺ about azl? Yes, there is, right? Now, so this means the Prophet ﷺ knew about it. Yeah. In that case.
What was the hadith?
Since we know about it.
No, because someone after the death of the Prophet ﷺ narrated about it. Okay, I'll get to that point in a second. The hadith exactly, he was going to prohibit it? Or
yeah, he was going to because it might cause
a type of birth defect.
But when he saw the Jews doing it.
This is about Azl, or this is about, this is the other one?
No, but he knew about
Yeah. No. It's a different hadith. Yeah. Okay. It's okay. Inshallah, I will tell you later. Now, there's one thing about this that we should be careful about. Okay, Muhammad Abdul Qadir, and he rejects this condition in his book on Af'al Rasul. And actually, the reason he rejects it, more or less, is because this idea that the Prophet ﷺ had to know about the act, and it is sometimes used by the fuqaha as a way of defending their madhab. Okay? Yani, for example, the different madhab or different ulama, they say that yani, when you make sajda, it is not permissible to make sajda on any part of your clothing. And in other words, you cannot put, if you have like a coat, you cannot put it down and make sajda on it. Or if you have something on your head, you have to remove it and make sajda on the ground. Okay? This is an opinion among the fuqaha. So there's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, there's a hadith in which one of the Sahaba said that during the Prophet's time, they used to put their clothes on the ground, or they used to make sajda on their clothes because of the heat. Okay, the ground was too hot, so they used to put their clothes or their head covering and make sajda on it instead of on the ground. Okay. The answer of these fuqaha is that this is not, and the Prophet ﷺ did not say anything about it. Okay, we're talking number 5 here. The Prophet ﷺ did not say anything about it. The answer of these fuqaha is that the Prophet ﷺ did not know what they were doing.
Well, how can they assume that he must have public?
That's Muhammad Abdul Qadir's point, that sometimes this condition is used as an excuse, not as an excuse, but as a way of defending your madhab if there's some iqrar that goes against your madhab. Now, if they're doing that, their argument is the Prophet ﷺ is praying in front of them, and so therefore how does he know that they're making sajda on their clothing? This can be refuted in 2 ways.
First of all, at the beginnings, salat, where you can turn your head.
Okay, let's assume it was in the last days. Okay, number 1, if they do this during the obligatory prayers, most likely they're going to do it during the sunnah prayers or nafilah prayers. After the Prophet ﷺ was finished, he's turning. It's a sunnah to turn towards the people after the prayer, and he not turn completely, but turn, and he can see people praying. Most likely they're going to do that also in the sunnah prayers. What else? Okay, that's they're saying, unless you bring some evidence for that. But the Prophet ﷺ has one of the khasa'is, not related to ahkam, but one of the specific characteristics of the Prophet ﷺ is during the salat he sees the people behind him during the prayer. Well, the Prophet ﷺ said that. He said, make your line straight. And in one of the hadith he says, even during the prayer, I see you during the prayer. So, anything that happened during the prayer, you cannot argue that the Prophet ﷺ didn't know about it. But that's not, the point is that you have to be careful about this condition, because some fuqaha will try to use this condition in order to defend their madhab.
Are you saying maybe they have to really prove it? So that they can then...
Yes, yeah. In other words, we have iqrar, and this is, you cannot argue against this iqrar by this argument. Okay, also with respect to the iqrar of the Prophet, it comes to us through certain ways. Usually it comes to us from the Sahaba. The Sahaba say, this is usually many times how the iqrar, not always, but many times how the Iqrar comes. The Sahaba say, we used to do such and such. Implying, we used to do it and there was nothing wrong with it. Should that be considered under these categories of Iqrar? Why not?
Well, because Rasulullah might not knew about it.
Okay, number one, the Prophet may not have known about it. So he's one of those fuqaha who use this argument too. Okay, our answer to that goes back to here. If it's something well known that happened among the people, we have to assume the Prophet said it about it. Yes, you have to distinguish.
Yeah, we have to distinguish when we say we do.
Yes. What else? What else is the difficulty with this statement?
Maybe after Rasulullah.
Exactly. This may have occurred after the Prophet ﷺ.
How about following the sunnah of Muhammad and the Khulafa?
Okay. Whether the one answer to this one is that the actions of the Sahaba's hujjah, or at least of Abu Bakr or Umar, but that's a different topic now. Okay? But especially during the later years of the Sahaba, if the Sahabi who's saying this is from the later, one who died, one of the last to die, that's problematic. We don't know if he's referring to during the early time of the Sahaba or during the time of the Prophet. Okay.
He's trying to prove that it is okay because he has done it for people who remember.
Depends, it depends on how did he make that statement. Someone could take that statement out of context and just narrate the fact that the Sahaba said we used to do such and such. Okay.
It has to be judgment from other.
In other words, this is going to be maybe number 6 over here in strength. It's not strong.
Maybe
And I don't think so. It cannot. I don't think it can fall under 6.
no, number 8.
Number what?
Number 8, very long.
This one have to be after number 8. You mean? But what they used to say many times is that during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, we used to do such and such. Okay. So if he says during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, we used to do such and such, that takes care of number 2, right? But we still have the problem with the first point. Okay. Okay. I guess these should actually be A and B. Don't want to confuse anyone. These come under one over here. Alright? What's the second condition? Or what's another condition for Iqrar to be considered hujjah?
Okay.
Yes.
If there was a revelation after the Qur'an.
Okay.
And there has to be no revelation after the Qur'an for that Qur'an to stand.
Okay, that's a good point. Let me write this one down. That's actually a type of nasakh, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good point. I like that. No revelation. Okay. That's a good point. No revelation after the Iqrar, Okay. What else? Okay, there is a condition that some ulama mention, that the Prophet ﷺ must have had the ability, or he should not have been afraid to reject the deed. Now? No, we'll get to that one. And no fear, concerning it. Any comments on this?
No, I have something.
Or something else?
Yes. I don't know, I'm just thinking about it. What happens if you have an Iqrar? And then
Okay. Comments on this one, Ahmed?
This is the problem. Because Rasulullah sallam لا يخاف له مثلا not afraid from any magic from anywhere at any time.
Okay. Is it true that the Prophet ﷺ used to have bodyguards? Yes. Until when? Okay. And the Prophet ﷺ used to have bodyguards until the verse was revealed that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protects him from the people. So, this condition is probably true, or not probably true, or could be true until the revelation of this verse. When was that verse revealed? Okay, it's early in Medina. Okay. Okay. So this condition, if this condition is correct, for example, what Ahmed said is true, that when it comes to the Sharia, we don't expect the Prophet ﷺ feared the punishment or the harm of anyone. But if this condition is correct, then it's only correct in the early days in Medina and of course during the Meccan period. But after that, this condition is not cannot be applied. And there's lots of discussion about this condition, but I think this is the easiest or the best answer to that. If it applies at all, it only applies in the early periods. Now, again, Muhammad al-Qadir, in his book, he completely rejects this condition. And the reason he rejects this condition is because he says this is one of those hypothetical conditions that the Usuliyin come up with, but there's no actual application for it. And I have checked many books on Usul Fiqh, and I haven't seen anyone give an example where the Prophet ﷺ did not do something out of fear. As opposed to the other conditions that were mentioned, there are examples for it.
He checked or you?
I checked. I assume before he wrote it, he came to that conclusion, and I checked what he said. I have.
There must not be a contradiction between the Qur'an and like a revelation or a hadith or statement.
Yeah.
Where can we put that?
Okay. Right now we're not getting into, with respect also to the explicit actions of the Prophet ﷺ, we're not getting into where there's some dispute between the action and the statement and so forth. We'll leave that for a much later time, because it is a big topic, and there's some general principles to be applied first, which deal with the topic as a whole. Okay. The fourth condition, is that the person performing the act must be, what can we say? Someone with taqwa. Muslim with taqwa. Okay. Not only that, the kuffar. And the kuffar were doing many things. The Prophet ﷺ did not point out to all of them that what they are doing is wrong. Okay? At least he did not always point out that every action that they are doing. Yeah, I'm saying this is excluding. This excludes. I was building upon Ahmed's statement. This excludes the kuffar. In other words, for example, in Medina, when the Jews were practicing their religion, the Prophet ﷺ did not talk about every aspect of their worship and say, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. But he just left them to practice. Okay, that is not iqrar from Usul al-Fiqh point of view. Same applies to the Christians. Okay, the question is, what about the hypocrites? What about the hypocrites? When the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was going with the Sahaba to the Battle of Uhud, what did the hypocrites do? Okay, they returned. Did the Prophet ﷺ say anything about that? And can we assume that if the Prophet ﷺ didn't say anything about that, that means he approves of what they did?
No.
Okay. So in the case of the hypocrites, there's two cases. Okay. If the person was a well-known hypocrite, yes, there was. Yes, during the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, there was well-known hypocrites, and there was other hypocrites that only Hudayfa knew who they were. Okay. So if it's a case of a well-known hypocrite doing something, and the Prophet ﷺ did not reject what he did, then this is not iqrar. And this goes back to that when we talked about proofs against it being hujjah. They said it might be the case that the Prophet ﷺ knows that it will not help that person. فَذَكِّرْ إِنَّ فَعَتِ ذِكْرًا. Okay, this condition answers that charge against the hujjah or taqrir being hujjah. And if it is not a well-known hypocrite, in other words, the people didn't know that he is a hypocrite, then the Prophet ﷺ would have had to respond to his actions. A fifth condition for the and this is also one that I'm sorry. No, the sixth will stir some controversy. It has to be the case, and this actually goes maybe with four or and it's also related. Yeah, it's related to this one, and it has to be the case that and it is not known that Allah or the Prophet clearly prohibited the act before and after its occurrence. Okay? What we mean by that is that there might be an act which is clearly prohibited either by Allah or in the Qur'an or by the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ by his statements. And we know even the time period in which it was prohibited. And there is an incident where someone does something going against this. Okay, this is not evidence all of a sudden that the act is permissible. Okay, because the act may have been done for a specific reason that we don't know. So in this case, too much doubt is cast upon the iqrar, that type of iqrar, so we don't accept it.
Why clearly?
Why clearly? If it's not clearly, if it's something, based on your own ijtihad, you say that something is haram, and then we find the case where that, you read a verse in the Qur'an and you conclude from that verse that something is haram, and then we find a case where it was done in front of the Prophet ﷺ and he didn't do anything. Okay, that's the case where probably your ijtihad was wrong. Okay, but if it's a case where it's clearly prohibited, in other words, it's not open to ijtihad, that's what we're talking about here.
Why before and after?
Okay.
Why this?
Just what we're trying to say is that it is known, that it is something forbidden. That's all we're trying to say. It is well known. So therefore, if you picked one act that someone did it, again, it might be the case that the person who did it was ignorant and the Prophet ﷺ did not know that he did it and so forth. And we're just trying to remove those doubtful cases. Okay, the sixth condition, which as I said, this one is rather questionable, is that the act, I never know how to say these things exactly, the act of rejecting the deed the act of rejecting the deed would lead to some positive result. Okay, what I mean by that, personally I don't believe that this applies to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, but what I mean by that is that if you study Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy anil Munkar, or ordering the good and eradicating the evil, when you try to eradicate the evil, the person might stop the evil completely. Okay, that would be A. B, yani you might stop some of the evil, but you may not stop all of the evil. That would be B. C, yani you might stop yani one act, but then he will do an equivalent act to it. That would be C. D, you might stop him and you may lead him to do something worse. That'll be D. Okay, ordering good and eradicating evil is wajib or obligatory in the first two cases. If you have the power to do it and so forth and so on. In case C, it's a matter of ijtihad. Okay. In case D, it is considered either yani forbidden or disliked. Okay, case D, for example, is the famous story of Ibn Taymiyyah when some Mongols were drinking and some of his associates said, yani, they are drinking, we should stop them from drinking. And he said, yani, that the yani, prohibition of drinking is to keep, yani, why one reason, or he said, yani, that alcohol is prohibited because it keeps people away from the prayers. But if you stop them from, but he said in their case, it keeps them from killing any other people. So in other words, what he's saying is that in the case of the Mongols, it's better to let them drink, because when they drink, they just hurt themselves and they don't kill others. While if you stop them from drinking, then they will lead to greater harm. So in other words, in that case, you don't stop them. Okay? So some of the usuliyin, they said that, and in order for the iqrar to be correct, has to be either A or B. If it's C or D, we don't accept it. But I don't believe, yani, that this applies to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay.
And this goes a little bit against the number 4.
Number 4, yeah. Well, in this case, yani, it might be a believer who is doing something wrong, and this is the argument. It's a believer who is doing something wrong, and if you stop him, he might do something worse. Or it could be just a subset. If it's a subset of this, and for example, with respect to the hypocrites, then it's probably a valid argument.
Yeah. That would be a good...
So, this should be a subset. This would be the strongest. Give me your pen again. He said, give me your pen again. Is that sixth condition?
I don't like the condition. There was also an example of the hypocrites in Ghazwat al-Khandaq. That also the Prophet didn't prohibit the munafiqeen from doing some acts, I don't know, because it was going to develop to something really big in the society.
Oh, I just thought of an example of this, by the way. Yani what? Oh no, okay, never mind. That's another case. I'm not sure, yani, what the example you're pointing out.
I think that was the munafiqeen tried to tell basically the mu'mineen to quit the war. And then after the Sahaba won the war, I don't think he couldn't really prosecute these munafiqeen.
Okay, we'll deal with that under tark, or the actions the Prophet ﷺ didn't do.
Because they were munafiqeen, and they were doing like a lot.
And this could be true, may not be true, but I don't think.
But for myself, I don't like.
You don't like it. Okay. The seventh condition. Yeah. Seventh condition is that there's no known cause. No known cause explaining the taqrir or the iqrar of the Prophet ﷺ. And what I mean by explaining it is that, and showing the action is not correct.
I remember.
Okay.
Because that's Muhammad al-Ghazali saying that his interpretation of it is that he killed the munafiqeen, he prosecuted them and killed them because of what they did in the war. Then the people, not the Sahaba, people, the people, the majority might say Muhammad is killing.
Yeah, this is the Prophet ﷺ himself said that. We'll discuss that, as I said, under tark, not under iqrar.
No cause explaining.
Yeah. In other words, if we know why the Prophet ﷺ didn't do anything about the action, then that's not one of the iqrar. For example, the Prophet ﷺ told Aisha that if it was not for your people being newly from kufr, then I would have demolished the Kaaba and rebuilt it upon its proper foundation. Okay. So in other words, the Prophet ﷺ is not showing that he accepts the foundations of the Kaaba as the people of Jahiliyyah had it. But he's explicitly stating what's the reason that he doesn't do or why he accepts the situation. So if there's some explicit cause and explaining the situation, obviously it is not a type of iqrar from the Prophet ﷺ. Okay.
So I think we should write more.
Go ahead.
No cause explaining
the iqrar.
Not to do the thing.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. For explaining the iqrar. Explaining why he just accepted it. If you want to put it in English. Explaining why he just accepted it and didn't do anything about it. That's what I meant by explaining the iqrar.
You brought the example of the Kaaba said the foundation.
Yes.
He didn't like the foundation.
They are not the proper foundation. But since the people were new from kufr, he said this after the victory over Mecca. The people were new from kufr. The Kaaba was something very special to them. To destroy the Kaaba and rebuild it, it would not have been acceptable to the people at that time. Abdullah bin Zubayr later he did it. But during that time it wouldn't have been acceptable. So in other words, he's accepting the foundation of the Kaaba the way they had it, but he is saying that this acceptance from me is not because it's correct, but I have a reason for it. As soon as that reason was gone, at least this is the way Abdullah bin Zubayr understood it, and in fact this is clear from what he said, as soon as that reason was gone, the time came that the Kaaba could be demolished and rebuilt. It's original, the proper.
Demolished again after Allah returned back to the original that Rasul said.
Right? Yeah. It's been demolished now on a number of occasions.
Yeah. Rasul was also saying that he wants to have the Kaaba to have 2 doors.
Yeah.
Not 21.
No. Okay.
Just try it again.
Yeah. Well, we have this number 7. So from these conditions, the clear ones that are pretty much acceptable and are clear. Number 1, the Prophet ﷺ had to know about it, or at least we have reason to believe that he knew about it. Obviously, there was no revelation after the iqrar. Number 3, probably we don't have to worry about it too much. Number 4 is still valid. Number 5 obviously is still valid. Number 6 is questionable. It might be a subset in number 4. And number 7. So you can boil it down into really 5 important conditions that the iqrar has to meet. In order for it to be a sound iqrar. Sahih iqrar. In other words, in order for it to be considered hujjah by us. And be careful, as I said, about the first condition. Don't do what some fuqaha do with it. Okay, any questions about that? Okay. The next, as I said, there are 8 types of actions of the Prophet ﷺ. 8 types of sunnah. But we don't really have the time to go into the next one. So this will be all that we're going to discuss about the actions of the Prophet ﷺ. And next time we're going to move into a different topic. And because as I said, the actions could take us the rest of the semester if we wanted to. So inshallah next time we'll move into a different area, something completely different. And it's still related to the sunnah, but completely different from this kind of topic. So if there's any question from any of the last 5 lectures, now's your chance. Yes.
Did the Sahaba have fuqaha in that, like the time immediately after the
Sure. Yeah, we discussed the history of usul al-fiqh and fiqh in the early weeks of the class. Yeah. Any other questions?
We did not discuss how to get a hukum from that Qur'an.
From these iqrar? Hey. Now, that's a good point. What is the conclusion we get from these? Well, also, by the way, this is related to this. Okay? Because if it is number 5 and number 4, and most likely the most we can say it is mubah. Permissible. But if it is number 1, and we could say it's mustahab or recommended. Okay? And if it's in one of these two, it is between, we cannot say for sure.
So the highest regard to go is mustahab.
Yes. Why is that the case?
Because in order for it to be a wajib, we have to have clear.
Not only that. Are there things which are wajib that the Prophet ﷺ did not do? Oh, by the way, we had tacit disapproval. It's number 6. You were right. طيب. Any other question? طيب. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك بارك الله فيك.